It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. The sun had barely risen, casting a warm glow over the quiet neighborhood. Lily was in the backyard, throwing a ball for Max, watching him chase after it with the kind of energy that only a dog could possess. She smiled as he returned it, tail wagging, as if they'd been playing for hours instead of just a few minutes. Her heart was light, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. Then the sirens came. They were distant at first, but they grew louder as they neared her house. Lily looked up, puzzled. Max, always the protective guardian, stood between her and the approaching noise. His ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. He wasn't used to strangers invading their space, especially not this early. Moments later, the door to her backyard swung open, and a group of police officers appeared, their faces stern and their intentions unclear. "Ma'am, we're here to investigate a potential security threat in the area," one of them said, his voice firm but not unkind. Max immediately reacted, barking loudly, his body tense, ready to defend. Lily called out to him, trying to calm him, but it was too late. Before she could even take a step forward, one of the officers pulled out his gun, aiming it at Max. "Step back," he shouted, but Max was in full protective mode, and without warning, he lunged toward the officer, teeth bared. The sound of a gunshot echoed through the morning air. Lily's heart stopped as she watched Max collapse, his body hitting the ground with a sickening thud. The officers stood frozen, staring at the dog now lying motionless on the grass. Lily screamed, running to her dog's side, but it was too late. The bond they shared had been violently severed in a single moment of misunderstanding and fear. David stood at the window, staring out into the distance. The morning light reflected off the distant trees, but his mind wasn't on the beauty of nature. It was on his daughter, Lily, and the pain that was about to engulf her. For years, he had tried to protect her from the darker parts of his past, the parts that could never be erased. A former Delta Force commander, David's life had been filled with missions and dangers that most people could only imagine. The world he'd left behind was a world of secrets, precision, and violence, and a world that had kept him emotionally distant, even from his family. His eyes lingered on the family photo on the mantel. Lily as a young girl, Max at her side, both smiling, full of life. David's fingers brushed over the edge of the frame. He hadn't realized how deeply his daughter had come to rely on the stability he gave her, despite the fact that he was never around. His military career had always come first, even if it meant distant, fleeting moments with the people he loved most. The tragedy that had unfolded in the backyard shattered something in him. It was the kind of pain he had seen in battle, the kind that lingered long after the enemy had been dealt with. But this was different. This wasn't some nameless target he could forget. This was his daughter, her heart broken, her world destroyed, and he knew something had to be done. This wasn't a battle he would let anyone else fight. David had seen too much, endured too much, to let this go unanswered. The man who had once commanded elite soldiers now had only one mission: to ensure justice was served. Lily couldn't stop crying. The pain of losing Max felt like a weight pressing on her chest, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape it. She wandered through the house feeling like a ghost in her own life. Her father, quiet and distant, had barely said a word since the incident. He was a man of action, not words, and she knew that in his own way he was grieving too. But it wasn't the same. She needed someone to understand her pain, to feel the loss with her. One evening, as she wandered into her father's study, her eyes fell on a small, locked box tucked away on a shelf. It was a relic of another time, one she had never been allowed to touch. Her curiosity got the best of her. After finding the key in the drawer, she opened it, her fingers trembling. Inside, she found a collection of photographs, medals, and documents, images of a man she hardly recognized. A younger David, wearing the dark, intense uniform of a Delta Force commander, posing with fellow soldiers in faraway places. She sifted through the items, her mind racing, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. As the pieces slowly fell into place, her grief shifted into something else, a deep, gut-wrenching realization. Her father wasn't just a quiet man with a dangerous past. He was a force to be reckoned with, someone capable of much more than she had ever known. David sat in the darkened living room, the only light coming from the faint glow of the television. His eyes were fixed on the screen, but his mind wasn't on the news or the mundane evening routines. It was on Lily, on the girl who had lost so much. He could feel her sorrow, her pain, even though she hadn't spoken about it much. It was the same feeling he had when he lost his own comrades. But this was different. This was his daughter, the child he had vowed to protect. His fingers tightened around the edge of the couch, his jaw clenching as the image of Max, lifeless on the grass, played over and over in his mind. He had been trained to suppress emotions, to stay calm, to think through every scenario logically. But this was no ordinary loss. This wasn't some nameless enemy in a far-off country. This was personal. This was an injustice that he couldn't let slide. Without a word, he stood up and walked to his study. The box she had opened earlier was still on the table, a silent witness to the life he had hidden from her. He took a deep breath, looking at the contents, the medals, the photos, the mementos of a past that had shaped him into the man he was today. He didn't need to plan. He knew what had to be done. It was time for Lily to understand who her father really was. The time for action had come. David moved swiftly like a shadow, preparing for the steps ahead. His military training kicked in, the precision he had honed over years of covert operations guiding his every action. He was methodical, calm, and focused, every move deliberate. There was no room for mistakes, not with his daughter's grief and the justice that needed to be served. His mind was clear, his emotions locked away as he prepared his gear, pulling from his years of experience. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, gathering everything he needed: the weapons, the tools, the plans. He didn't need to ask for help. This was his fight, and he would do it alone. The police officers who had taken Max's life had no idea what they had stirred in him. To them, it had been a routine call. But David knew better. He knew how to read people, how to track and target those who posed a threat. They had underestimated him, thinking him just another father with a quiet life. As he prepared, he thought of Lily, her innocence, her loss, and how much she had yet to understand about the man she called father. This was the life he had kept hidden from her, the side of him she would never have known if it weren't for this tragic moment. But now it was time for him to make it right. There would be no turning back. David's car hummed quietly down the dimly lit streets as he made his way toward the police station. Every muscle in his body was tense, but his mind was calm. His plan was in motion, and there was no room for second thoughts. He knew what he was doing, and he knew the consequences. This wasn't just about getting revenge for Max. This was about sending a message to the officers who thought they could take a life without accountability, and to the world that had never understood the true depths of the man who had raised Lily. He parked a few blocks away from the station and made his way on foot, blending into the shadows like a predator closing in on its prey. His heart rate was steady, his focus unbroken. He wasn't afraid. Fear was a luxury he hadn't allowed himself in years. When he reached the station, David didn't hesitate. He moved swiftly, disabling the cameras and taking out the few officers who were on duty. They never saw him coming, just like all the other enemies he had eliminated in the past. One by one, he neutralized them, ensuring they couldn't alert anyone else. It was brutal. It was necessary. In the heart of the station, David stood over the group of unconscious officers, knowing that this wasn't just about them anymore. This was about making sure the pain Lily felt, the injustice she had suffered, would never be forgotten. As he moved toward the next step, he knew he had done what was needed, and he would do whatever it took to protect his family. By the time David returned home, the weight of his actions had begun to sink in. The house was eerily quiet, save for the soft rustle of the wind outside. Lily was upstairs, likely still lost in her grief, unaware of the storm her father had just unleashed on the city. But David knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. He entered the house slowly, the door creaking softly as he stepped inside. There was a certain stillness in the air, a calm before the storm. His mind raced as he thought about the police officers he had neutralized, the plans he had set in motion. The consequences of his actions were inevitable, and he wasn't naive enough to think he could avoid them. But in his heart, he knew it was worth it. Max had been taken from them unfairly, and no amount of bureaucracy or legal system would bring him back. He had acted as any father would, not out of anger, but out of necessity. Lily came downstairs a few moments later, her face still streaked with tears. She looked up at her father, her eyes searching his face for any sign of what he had been up to. David met her gaze with a steady, calm look, his expression unreadable. "Dad, what happened?" she asked softly. He walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I did what needed to be done," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "For you and for Max." She didn't ask any more questions. In that moment, she understood. The justice he sought was not for the world, it was for her.